Well, I'm certainly not on the right channel, but I guess since I'm here, I'll go ahead and subject you all to my opening instead of Ocean's. Alrighty, well, I'm gonna go ahead and let you guys know that my name is Suris, and I'm currently co-opting Ocean's channel in order to proliferate the ruthless atheist agenda. And in lieu of that totalitarian agenda that I must comport to, today we're gonna talk about the utility of exposure. And no, not in that sense. That's gross. Please get that thought out of your head. I know you might think exposure like that is all kinds of kinky, but it's not what we're going to be talking about today. Now today, I have a few stories I want to give you guys, and hopefully they'll give us all a framework that we can use going forward when it comes to conversation. But first, a show of hands, maybe from the comment section. How many of you have talked to a Christian who said that paganism is devil worship? And now that the comment section is flooded with nothing but yeses, the next question would be, how many of you have talked to an atheist who has said that all possible forms of theism are irrational? And lastly, how many of you have talked to a polytheist that has said that all monotheists and atheists are narrow-minded or just two sides of the same coin that ought be discarded? Now, I know that in each of these three camps, not everybody ends up falling into these same social paradigms, but I'm sure that all of you have heard at least one thing from one camp. The first two probably more than the last. But why is this? I think, honestly, it comes down to a lack of exposure, and here's why. For those who don't know my story, I grew up as a Christian, specifically as a young Earth creationist, in a private school that was the love child of a Seventh-day Adventist and a member of the IFB that happened to have a lot of money. I was taught pretty early on that Wiccans and pagans and all forms of polytheists were all devil worshippers and were evil, but I was also taught that about Pokemon, and you can bet your ass that I played a hell of a lot of that. But the idea that those who practiced witchcraft and other rituals that were alien to me still sounded kinda icky. That is, until I started playing World of Warcraft and found myself in a guild where my guild leader was a pagan. This isn't something that I really understood at the time, but I was an opinionated kid, so when religion got brought up, I didn't shirk away from conversation, I jumped in head first. I liked my guild leader, she was a really good person, and we're still friends to this day, but it was through being exposed to somebody that had these beliefs and did in fact engage in these practices that I was told were evil, and understanding from a very young age that this person wasn't that much different from me. Sure, we didn't believe in the same God, but ultimately, what did that really matter? We were still friends, and I started to become fascinated with the inner workings of their religion. This was when I was in middle school, and I had only met maybe one or two other people that considered themselves polytheists. I am in the South, so anything that's not an evangelical Christian is rare to begin with. But it was through this exposure, specifically exposure where I didn't know what this person's religion was beforehand, that I started to realize that these people were no different than me. Had I been told that she was a polytheist from the get-go, I'm not even certain that our friendship would have been able to start in the first place. Because when we're told as a society that the other is evil and shouldn't be fraternized with, that tends to shape your schemas for everyone going forward. Luckily though, things didn't happen in such a way to let that get in the way of our friendship. We were friends in our guild for about 8 months to a year before we ever actually had a phone conversation and got to the point where we were actually legitimately discussing theology with one another. It also helps that at this point, I had gotten out of my religious private school and gotten into the public sphere of education, so I had some time to be exposed to other different ideas than my own. But again, therein lies that same principle. Exposure. It was through exposure to these other ideas and exposure to these other people that taught me that we weren't so different, and in fact, if we had a common goal, it was better to work together than to simply ostracize one another. It also taught me that there are some disagreements that aren't necessarily that important. If someone didn't believe in the same God as me, that wasn't really a huge issue. Now, I was terribly inconsistent with this framework because as a kid, I would still try to convince people that they needed to join the Lord Jesus Christ, and I had conversations about it with my other friends who were polytheists. So it wasn't something that just immediately flicked off like a light switch. It was something that slowly but surely had to be taken away. It was through repeated exposure to different people and different ideas that I could finally discard the idea of having to convert everybody to my own personal beliefs and framework. And I think that's kind of the importance of commingling. You can't really understand somebody from the other side if all you do is look at them as if they're the other. you won't be able to develop a meaningful friendship, and at the end of the day, there are people that you know right now who have belief structures different from you, and that doesn't even factor into conversation. You might not even know what their personal epistemology is, or whether or not they're a theist. So there's definitely a utility when it comes to exposure, and not just when it comes to people who are of a different religion than us. This goes with different political frameworks as well. Think about your political position for just a moment. Has it been strawmanned by somebody on the opposite side? And when the inevitable answer of yes comes up, consider, was it on purpose, or is it that they simply don't know? Was this person from an opposite political affiliation simply uninformed about your personal position? I'm not saying the strawmanning was right, but I am saying that without that exposure, it's hard not to. Again, let me bring up an example from earlier in the video. If the only theism that an atheist has ever been exposed to is the strict totalitarian monotheistic paradigm, then when they meet a polytheist for the first time later in life, what's the first thing that they're going to think? Are they going to think that it's rational? Are they going to think that you're trying to convert them? At the end of the day, the only thing that they've been exposed to up to that point is people trying to convert them who have what they would consider an incoherent God concept because, well, a tri-omni God doesn't exactly function terribly well for consistency. However, if this atheist is exposed to polytheistic views, ones that are more well thought out and rational and don't have to rely on apologetics anywhere near as much, then maybe some of the hostilities between atheists and polytheists can be averted. But it all ends up coming back to exposure. Unless people have seen these other ideas, they can't actually understand them to begin with. This is one of the reasons why when Ocean and I first started talking, he was a little taken aback by the fact that I was an atheist, but wasn't hostile to polytheists. It was because back when I was a Christian, I was exposed to these ideas very early on, and it was something that years ago I had already wrestled with. We didn't have to have a conversation about how polytheistic gods are more coherent than monotheistic ones. I had already had those conversations many years before, and I wouldn't have had the opportunity to have those conversations had I not been exposed to a polytheist to begin with, and had that particular polytheist not been willing to explain their point of view to me, even if I, being the bigoted Christian at the time, might not have really deserved that information. So, all in all, what am I really trying to say with this video? I think what it really boils down to is that if we're going to have a society, we need to have people who are willing to deal with each other and not be openly hostile. We also need to have people who are willing to understand other points of view. So, go have a conversation if you've the wherewithal to do so. Have a rational discussion about your beliefs and your ideas. You and your interlocutor may not be able to change each other's minds, but you'll at least be able to understand where each other are coming from. Ocean hasn't made me a polytheist, and I most certainly haven't made him an atheist, but we've also been able to forge a pretty strong friendship regardless. So yeah, go be happy, make friends. I really don't know how to close out this video. I'm not on my own channel. If you haven't subscribed to Ocean, go ahead and do so. If you haven't subscribed to me, then trust me, it's a giant mistake. Don't do it. Anyways, I hope you all have a wonderful day. I'll see some of you on Hammered Out with Ocean, or in the comment section down below.